All right, hello everyone. Today's video is a simple PowerPoint presentation about light and how it affects a camera. The reason I'm making a video like this, I'm actually teaching my girlfriend how to use cameras. She's shown a lot of interest in it, and I figured I need to sort of teach her a little crash course about how cameras work and stuff, so that way I could bring her in on a wedding or any other kind of shoot. So I made her like a simple PowerPoint presentation like this. I thought maybe there would be other people out there who could benefit from this, so this is why I'm making this video. This is the first one I made. It's just about a simple concept, light. I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. So, light. It's the main component that makes video possible. It's just like your eyes. Your eyes cannot work without light. So there may be a couple parallels in this presentation with your eyes and light. And if you know how it affects your camera and you know how to control it, you'll be able to get the best image possible, and your skills will increase tenfold. Light is huge. The two most important things about light, one is the amount of light that is in any given environment. The second is the color of light. So there's a lot that goes into videography, but light is huge. You need to know how much light you have, how much you need, and what color that light is. So first thing about the amount of light, in most cases, in almost every case, the more light is the better. The better your image is going to be because your sensor needs that light, just like your eyes need that light. When it's bright outside, your eyes can see better, so can your camera. The sun, like sunny days, huge. If you're not outdoors or you're indoors, if you're in an environment where you don't have a lot of light, what can you do? So ask yourself that. And if your shooting environment has no light, what you need to do is get light somehow. Sometimes you can open blinds to get more light. You need to bring in your own lights and set up a custom lighting setup. That 1 out of 10 times that you don't need a lot of light could be an instance like the next slide when you're trying to influence the mood of your scene. So something like this, we don't have a lot of light, but it works because it's a very dramatic scene. You know, you have that huge shadow on the right side of his face there, his left side. So in this instance, we don't need all that light because we're going for a certain feel. But in most cases, if you're not doing anything dramatic like this, you want as much light as you can get in control. You don't want it like super bright, but we'll get into that in a second. So light can be measured and controlled in 3 ways on your camera. The first is the aperture. That is the first thing the light hits when it goes through into your camera. It's also called the iris or the f-stop. There is an aperture in every single lens, just about. I've never heard of a lens that doesn't have aperture. And basically what it does is it functions like your pupil does in your eye, your iris, you know, like when it's bright outside, your pupils get small to control that amount of light. So it's not too bright, and when it's dark, they expand open to get and try and receive as much light as they can. The second thing, once that light comes through your lens, goes through your aperture, it's going to hit your camera's sensor, and depending on your camera's ISO setting or your exposure or your gain, the sensor decides how much of that light that's just been taken in through the aperture that it wants to use. The next is shutter speed. If you've taken a picture before and you've heard that little click, that's your shutter. It's like a barn door that opens and closes and lets in a certain amount of light based on whatever speed that it is set at. The longer it's open, the more light is used. It's a little different in video, but basically I'll explain that here on the next slide. So again, your aperture, it's displayed as a little F with a forward slash. They usually have these decimals here, this f1.8, f4.0, f16, and basically what those are stops of light. They call it the f-stop because there's only 1.8 stops of light compared to this 4 stops of light, 16 stops of light, and the higher the number, the more stops, more light is being stopped from entering the lens. It's kind of counterintuitive, but the higher the number, the darker your image is going to be, the less light you are receiving. F1.8 is a very wide open aperture. You're going to be letting in a lot of light. F16 is going to be more stopped up, and you're going to be decreasing the amount of light that comes in through your lens. The exposure is usually set in increments of 100 or 50 or so, but sometimes there's a couple off ones, but you can see here you got 100, 150, 200, 320, 400, 600. The higher that number, the more sensitive your ISO is going to get to that light. So you would want to use an ISO of like 100 when you're in a very, very lit environment and you don't need your camera to be very sensitive because there's already a lot of light. You don't need to try and boost up the amount of light that you're getting. Whereas in a dark situation, like indoors somewhere, you might want to boost up to 800, 1600 if you have to essentially make use out of all the light that's coming in through that lens. Shutter speed is measured in fractions of a second. You have 1/30, 1/125, 1/250. Basically, the 1/30 is going to be a much slower shutter speed. It's going to let in more light, whereas 1/250th of a second is a very fast shutter speed. So the smaller the fraction, and you got to remember that 1/250 is smaller than 1/30. So the higher that number gets, really, the smaller fraction is. But the smaller fraction it is, you're going to be getting less light. So you basically use all three of those things to get your exposure correct. You want your exposure to be properly set so that your image is not blown out. That happens when your exposure is too high. Basically, it's too hot, people say. It's too bright, and you lose details in your white and highlighted areas in your image. If it's too low, your image will be crushed, they say, or it will be underexposed. That means you're going to start losing detail in your darks. So you want to make sure that your image is balanced using those three things. So here are a couple examples of incorrect exposure. So this one on the left is overexposed. You can't use it. It looks really gross, and you cannot edit that. You cannot do anything in post-production editing that is going to fix that because it is blown out. On the right, you see the opposite. It's too dark, and you can try and bring that up in post, but it's too underexposed. You can't get those details back. So you want to have it properly exposed, like this. Details in the highlights and the darks are visible. Nothing is blown out. We can see all the little fluffy parts of the clouds. We can even see a little bit of the shadow in the rocks. We can see all of that. It's not too bright, not too dark. So that's going to be the first thing you want to do as far as when you're controlling your light, is properly expose your image. A quick tip that I didn't even understand until I was a little bit into my videography career is the histogram. It's a really useful thing to use, and it just makes looking at your exposure like a visual graph, and it makes it simple, it makes it easy. Basically, it's a setting, you can turn it on and you look at it and you just want to make sure that it spikes towards the middle. It basically looks at all of your pixels and figures out how many pixels are dedicated to brights, how many pixels are dedicated to darks, and if that peak is right in the middle, that means that your camera thinks that this image is properly exposed, which it usually is correct. It's never wrong. If it's too far to the left, it means that more pixels are dedicated to the darks, and you need to bring it up a little bit. That means it's underexposed if it's peaking on the left side of the histogram. If it's peaking to the right, it just means it's too bright. It means you need to bring your exposure down a little bit. So once you find that balance, getting it right in the middle, using those three things, your aperture, your ISO, and your shutter speed, that's another easy way you can that's an easy way to tell if you're properly exposed, besides just looking at it. The next thing is color of light. This is also something that I was a little hazy on starting out. It doesn't seem that important until you start getting a little deeper into cinematography and understanding that shots have to match. You want to make sure that your color balance, your white balance, lines up shot to shot, or else people are going to notice if something looks too blue or too red. They're going to be able to tell. This is a question you can ask yourself. All light has a certain color. What color is the light in this room? Probably something you've never really thought about. It's a good thing to understand what color is this light really. So it can be on a scale of warm or cold. The Kelvin scale measures color of light. So if we look at our scale over here, we have 10,000, 9,000, all the way down to 1,000. And you can see it at 10,000 Kelvin, you're looking at pretty much daylight. If there's not really a cloud in the sky. You come down to about 7,000 when it's a little cloudier, and you just keep going down that scale. It becomes more of a warmer color of light until you see sunrise at 2,000, tungsten light at about a little below that, and candlelight at 1,000 Kelvin. So what you want to do is match your camera to the color of the light in your environment. And this is called white balancing. I'll show you how to match your camera to the color of the light in your environment here. So using the graph on the last slide and using these icons, you can figure out what white balance you need to set your camera to. Yeah, auto can be pretty useful for the most part. You also have cloudy, daylight, tungsten, fluorescent, shade, flash, and a lot of times there's a custom setting for your Kelvin scale also. So again, auto white balance, your camera automatically matches to the color of your environment. If you want to manually set your white balance, you can use this scale and use these settings on your camera. So if it's middle of the day, daylight, you got a clear blue sky, you just want to set manually to anywhere from 10,000 to 15,000. If it is like sunset or sunrise, you're going to want to set to somewhere in the 3,000 to 4,000 range, depending on how yellow or how warm it is. So what color temperature is this? It's basically cool. I don't think the color of this room is that blue. It was obviously changed that way in post because you see these two yellow lights, so that room would have been more yellow and someone just changed the color temperature to blue. But just by looking at it, you should know that that is a cool color temperature. This is obviously a warmer one, so this is going to be on the lower end of the Kelvin scale. And the point is that you just need to be able to recognize this color temperature and white balance accordingly. So here's just another example of the different white balances you can set to using the same scene. So if this is daylight, which if you can tell here on the daylight and cloudy, those look like the most properly exposed, like that's how you'd probably see them in real life. But if you set your camera to white fluorescent, it's going to look a little more purple. Tungsten's going to look a little more blue. I guess the auto is what it should look like. Shade, you can get a little more warmer, and so that's just kind of a reference there. I try to just go for a neutral white balance, anywhere in between a warm and a cool, because you can change the color temperature when you're editing. So if you just go for a plain white, neutral white balance, you can always change it to whatever color temperature or mood that you're trying to make happen in that scene. So you can make it warmer or you can make it cooler if you want. Or you could just leave it the way it is, just neutral. So just a quick wrap up. Exposure is the amount of light you want to have your image properly exposed, and you also want to take into account the white balance. These are the two aspects of light. And if you are able to control both of these, you will get a much more professional image. And it just makes your job easier. It makes it easier in editing, and it makes it easier as far as telling a story. And, it just makes your job overall a lot easier. So that's it. So, yeah, hope you found this useful. This is my first time giving a little presentation, but I think I might make a few more of these as I continue to teach my girlfriend how to use a camera. Hit the thumbs up if you liked it. Comment below any kind of other instructional video that you would like to see, anything that you want to learn about. Maybe I know how to do it and I can teach you. Besides that, make sure to subscribe for more content, and I'll see you next time.